Hi, my name's Steven, and I'll be going over the ethmoid bone today. So, the ethmoid bone is centrally located in the skull. You can see it. This is right there. And also you can see it on the side, makes it part of the eye orbit, and also the nasal septum right there. And the ethmoid articulates with multiple bones of the skull. The frontal, the sphenoidal, the nasal, maxillae, lacrimal, palatines, inferior nasal conchae, and the vomer bone. And so, going to switch over to the ethmoid model. It's ethmoid. This is a anterior view of it, and the ethmoid is actually, contrary to what this plastic model is actually a very delicate structure. It's spongy, so it's actually filled with holes rather than being solid, and that's used to reduce weight. And there's a couple structures that help point it out, that help distinguish it. So this part right here, that is the cristagalli, and the cribriform plate. You can't actually see it here, but on the skull, it'd be this section right here. And the perpendicular plates, which would actually be this section right there. And can't really see it, but it would be down that way. And also there are two other structures, the superior and middle nasal conchae. The middle conchae is just these structures over in the back there, and the superior conchae you can't really see on the models since they're extremely small. So on the cribriform plate, which is, you can barely see it on this model. It is on the top of the ethmoid, on the dorsal side, and it is taken in by the ethmoid notch on the frontal bone and on the roof cavities of the nasal cavities. The anterior borders of the cribriform plate actually articulate with the frontal bone, and which are then received by depressions in the frontal bones, and they actually complete the foramen cecum. And now going on the cristagalli, this section right there. The cristagalli projects upwards from the middle of the cribriform plate, and it's shaped like a triangle, and it got its name from its resemblance to a rooster's comb. And the long posterior borders there, they act as an anchorage point for the falx cerebri, which is a sickle-shaped fold of dura mater which attaches to the cristagalli. And also continuing on, you notice that there's these two small depressions over here, and these actually, that's it actually where the olfactory bulbs are located, and the olfactory bulbs are located on the side of the cribriform plate, or on the cristagalli, and are supported by the cribriform plate. The cribriform plate has a foramina, as you can see these holes there. They're called olfactory foramina, and these foramina allow the passage of nerves through the roof of the nasal cavity, which lead to the olfactory bulbs, and that's how you smell. And going on to the perpendicular plate, which is over here, it's a thin piece of bone. It descends from the cribriform plate, and it assists in forming the septum of the nose, and it articulates to the spine of the frontal bone and also the nasal bones. The septal cartilage of the nose also attaches to the inferior border of the plate. And so, now we're going to be going over the nasal conchae, and the ethmoid contains 2 of the 3 nasal conchae, and the superior and middle. In most models, you can only see the middle and the inferior nasal conchae, and the inferior, which is actually a separate bone. And because of the nasal conchae, the superior nasal conchae are actually very small. And all the nasal conchae they fall under a class of bones called turbinate bones. And the turbinate bones are they're named because they create turbulence during inspiration, which slows down the air and allows it to be humidified and warmed before entering the lungs. The superior nasal conchae actually protect the olfactory bulb, and the middle nasal conchae acts as a buffer for the middle, anterior, and maxillary sinuses, and which in turn protects the sinuses from coming into contact with the pressurized nasal airflow. And a little interesting facts on the nasal conchae, you can sort of see it over here, is that it's actually one of your first lines of defense against the pathogens. The nasal conchae have goblet cells which produce mucus, and the mucus acts as a filter, and it catches airborne particles bigger than 2 to 3 micrometers in diameter. And also the epithelium of the conchae gives lymphatic access, and which in turn protects against viruses and bacteria. And the ethmoid contains 2 out of the 4 paired paranasal sinuses. You can't really see it on either of the models since they're actually inside the skull. And they're also the paranasal sinuses. There's a couple names: the ethmoid sinuses, or also the ethmoidal air cells, and they lie between the upper parts of the nasal cavities and the eye orbits. And they're separated by a thin bone lamina. And the sinuses themselves are innervated via the ethmoidal nerve cells and the pterygopalatine ganglion, and which control nerve fibers for mucus secretion via the facial nerves. And a small fact on the sinuses, and there is a disease called ethmoid sinusitis, which is actually an infection of the sinuses caused by a mucus backing up to the sinuses due to a swelling of the passages. And just to wrap things up, we went over the ethmoid bone, which is this thing right here, and also which is located centrally in the skull. And it's actually very hard. It's actually rarely preserved in human models because it's such a delicate bone, and also because it's usually punched out by handling. And so the ethmoid also separates the brain from the nasal cavity, and also just to go over it again. So we got the cristagalli, which is this section right, this little triangular section right there. The cribriform plate, which is this section right there on the side.